Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2025 New Jersey governor election, and we're looking at a new poll from the TIPP Insights, which is sponsored by the League of American Workers. Now this is a Republican affiliated poll, so you certainly do have to take these numbers I'm about to say with a grain of salt, as they could potentially be inflating the Republican Jack Ciattarelli's numbers. It doesn't always 100% work that way, but most of the time it's overvaluing the Republican by about 3 to 4 points or so. And in this poll, it shows that Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat, has 46%, Jack Ciattarelli has 39%, 2% are other candidates, and 12% undecided. And this is among likely voters. So this is very interesting, about a 7-point lead for Sherrill over Ciattarelli. Now, what's interesting here is that in a Republican poll, it shows Jack Ciattarelli is still having a bit of problems getting a high floor of support so far, but this is pretty much in line with the polling averages from Real Clear Politics and Race to the White House, where Ciattarelli is getting 37.7% in the Real Clear Politics one and 39.6% in the Race to the White House average, where the Democrat Mikey Sherrill is starting out with a much higher floor of support at 46% in Real Clear Politics and 47.1%. So this race for New Jersey in 2025, I was looking back at the polling data from the 2021 New Jersey governor's race and noticed something very similar. Obviously, we only know the numbers at the end of that cycle for New Jersey in 2021, but it ended with the Democratic governor Phil Murphy at a 7.8% lead in the average, getting 50.5%, Ciattarelli 42.7%, with 6.8% undecided. Now, obviously, this was in between October 15 to 31, and the dates updated as of November 1st, 2021. So this is after a lot of undecided vote was ultimately made up, because again, 6.8% were still undecided or other going into this race. When we look at it today, there's still a lot more undecided vote, about 10% more undecided based on the Real Clear Politics average compared to what it ended up being for 2021. But when you look at the numbers here, Mikey Sherrill leading by 8.3% in Real Clear Politics, that is an even larger lead than what we ultimately saw from 2021, where Murphy was leading by 7.8%. Now, I think there's a little bit of good news for Ciattarelli here, but there is a lot more good news for the Democrat Mikey Sherrill. The good news for Jack Ciattarelli is Mikey Sherrill is polling around 46% in the average, and that gives Ciattarelli an opening, because 46% in the state of New Jersey, based on what Ciattarelli did back in 2021, where he got about 48%, is a little bit of an opening for Ciattarelli if he can get enough undecided vote to get enough votes to win this race. The question will be, though, can Ciattarelli do that? Because this race in New Jersey is very interesting for a few reasons. One of them being, in 2021, this was an election where President Joe Biden was obviously a Democrat, and his approval rating started getting really unpopular around September, October, and heading into November, which obviously played a very important role on this governor's race. But even still, with all that, even though New Jersey certainly trended a lot more to the Republican side in 2021 and in the 2024 presidential election, the Democratic governor Phil Murphy still did win by 3.2%, 51.2 to 48% for Jack Ciattarelli. And this was in the anti-Joe Biden year. Now, not every election is exactly the same and exactly comparable, but this election, Jack Ciattarelli is looking at his map from 2021 and saying, okay, well, where can I expand? You're looking at places like Bergen County, like Passaic County, and you're hoping, can Ciattarelli make up margins in these areas to expand on this race and make it closer? Whereas the early polling data thus far seems to suggest things are actually slightly more favorable for the Democrat Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time. Now, this poll here towards the end of August 25th of 2028, when we look at the polling from 2021, do we have any direct comparables around the end of August? One from Fabrizio Lee and Associates, the top presidential pollster for Donald Trump, showed about a 2-point race between Murphy and Ciattarelli. But again, as is the top Republican pollster, not really too much to take away here. Monmouth University showed Murphy up 51 to 38, with 9% still undecided, 3% saying other. If all that undecided vote went for Ciattarelli, it would have ended up being about 51-47, almost in line with the result ended up being. But you look at some of the numbers Phil Murphy was getting in this race. Phil Murphy was getting around 50% into the final few weeks of the polls in New Jersey. So on the Democratic side, they certainly were missing on Jack Ciattarelli's support, but the Democrat was getting right around what he ended up actually getting, around the 51% or so. But Ciattarelli was in the low to mid 40s, having a trouble coalescing support. The polling data thus far for 2025 shows, again, a lot of undecided votes, with Jack Ciattarelli struggling to coalesce Republican support. He's polling anywhere from the mid to high 30s to the low 40% in the polls. Just a quick look here, the highest number we've seen Ciattarelli get comes from this TIP Insights poll, which is among regular voters, where he gets 43%. So clearly there's a lot of undecided vote left in this race. But Mikey Sherrill, currently getting around 46-47%, shows this race is still very much open. But at the same time, it looks like Mikey Sherrill is leading in this race, and by a pretty significant margin. This is about about an 8 to 9 point lead for Mikey Sherrill over Jack Ciattarelli right now. The only way that Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time would really be concerned in this race would be if we're getting to the end of October and these numbers have not changed. If Sherrill's continuing to be around 46-47% come the end of October, that would be a sign of there could be a potential upset underway in the state of New Jersey, because if the polling last time was accurate, that the Democrat was getting around 50%, that's what they ended up getting, that could be a potential worrying sign. But it's also worth noting, Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time is leading by 8.3%, and there's still a lot of undecided vote. And let's just say the 16.3%. Well, let's do a little bit of math here. Mikey Sherrill needs about 4% of those undecided votes to get to 50% of the vote. Jack Ciattarelli, based on the way the race is currently going, needs around 12 to 13% to get around that margin. So based on the polling, just on the polling alone, there's more undecideds that Ciattarelli needs to win than Sherrill needs to win. Now, the good news for 2021 was that of the undecided voters that were remaining at the time, of the 6.8%, Ciattarelli ended up winning roughly around 6% of them, or a little bit under 6% of them, to get up to about 48%. Phil Murphy only won about 0.7% of them. So if the undecideds brokered Ciattarelli the same way they did by margins-wise, like they did in 2021 as they did in 2025, there's a real opening for Ciattarelli to win this race. But that was an election environment that typically favors the party not in charge of the White House, being the Republicans in that one. This time around, it's the Republican Party in charge of the White House. So for Jack Ciattarelli to do that, not only is it in a state that ultimately voted for the Democrats in 2024, but Ciattarelli is running in that state that this election environment should go the opposite of how it went in 2021. So New Jersey would have to break the historical trend of the off party of the White House doing well in the governor elections in New Jersey in 2025. Ciattarelli would have to break history and break it by a considerable enough margin for that race to ultimately go his way. So right now, I think a lot of talk about this race is being that this race is essentially over and that Ciattarelli can't win. And I don't think I would go that far, because I think there is still a very large amount of undecided voters at this current point in time of this race, and the polling clearly shows this. But to say that Mikey Sherrill is not leading the race at this time is, I think, very inaccurate, because I do think Mikey Sherrill is leading, and I think if the election were held today, she would become the next governor of New Jersey. But there is a lot of undecided vote out there with a lot of support missing for Jack Ciattarelli. The question will be, though, what ends up happening with Ciattarelli. Because the last two governor elections we've seen in the state of New Jersey show two very different results. In 2021, Jack Ciattarelli got up to 48% of the vote and was in a very close competitive election in that anti-democratic presidential wave year. But Ciattarelli got up to 48%. Now, though, we could also look at what the election looked like in 2021. The Republican Kim Godano only got up to 42.2%. Phil Murphy got 55.7%. Now, it is worth noting, though, this 13-point victory from Phil Murphy was after 2 terms of Chris Christie being governor of New Jersey, and Christie did leave office with pretty poor approval ratings. So this time around, Phil Murphy is the outgoing governor. His approval ratings are relatively pretty split. He does have a little bit more unpopular than popular in New Jersey, but nowhere near the levels that Chris Christie had in New Jersey when he was leaving office. So I don't think we see anything like a 13-point Democratic victory in the governor's race in New Jersey. But what can Jack Ciattarelli do? He got up to 48% in 2021. The Republican only got about 42% in 2017. But for Ciattarelli to win this race, he's likely going to have to break that 48% that he got in 2021 against Mikey Sherrill to win this race. It's possible he could get lucky if one of the Libertarian candidates, Vic Kaplan, or Socialist Workers candidates, Joanne Kunansky, if one of them is able to get 3 or 4% third-party vote and take that vote away from Mikey Sherrill, that could give Jack Ciattarelli a little bit of an opening. But that is a major hope and a major thing to bank your entire candidacy on for that to happen. So for Ciattarelli to win, he has to be aiming for around that 50% number. And right now, he has a much harder path of getting there than Mikey Sherrill does. So it's going to be very interesting here, mapping how this race goes over the next few weeks and the next 2 months or so. Because does Mikey Sherrill continue to stay around this floor of 46-47%, but what does Jack Ciattarelli do? Is he able to replicate that 48% that he got in 2021, where it was a very close race, or in an election environment more favorable for the Democrats, does he have a harder time? Can he not capitalize on this? And does he end up somewhere maybe in between, around 44-45%, in between the 2017 and 2021 results? Because I don't think personally we're going to see a 2017 13-point win for Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. I just don't think that's currently in the cards at this point in time. But kind of halfway in between there, I think it's certainly on the table. Or are the polling completely off and Jack Ciattarelli could pull up an upset in New Jersey? After what we saw in New Jersey in 2024, where Kamala Harris only defeated Donald Trump by 5.9% here, what was Donald Trump's percentage in the state, though? What did President Trump end up getting? 45.9%, 46% or so, in New Jersey. We could see something very similar here in New Jersey in 2025, where Mikey Sherrill may win the governor's race by getting up to about 52% or so, like Kamala Harris did. But Jack Ciattarelli is able to not do as well as he did in 2021, but still improve on the 2017 Republican margins, getting to about 45-46%. So this is an interesting race that I'm watching, and I want to do a little video updating on the current polling numbers. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts and all that, and I hope to see you in a future video.